My name is Washington Roberts, and I never thought I'd be the kind of father who had to teach his daughter a lesson with silence instead of love. But when she looked me in the eye on Thanksgiving and told me to leave her porch, after everything I gave up to build her life, something inside me broke. This is the story of a daughter who forgot where she came from, and a father who finally remembered his own worth. If you've ever been pushed away by someone you raised, someone you protected, you'll feel every word of what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and if this hits home, hit subscribe. You're not alone in this. The cold Boston wind hit my face like a slap when I stepped out of the cab, pie in hand, heart pounding. My fingers tightened around the foil-covered dish like it was the only thing anchoring me to the moment. I had taken 3 trains and a cab to get here, 3 layers of jackets, a fresh haircut, and more than a few pep talks in the mirror just to show up on that porch. But as I walked up the stone path toward my daughter's house, the same one I had co-signed for, helped renovate, painted with my own damn hands, I noticed something off. No extra cars in the driveway. No wreath on the door. No warm kitchen light spilling through the windows like it used to. And then the door opened. There she stood, Autumn, my daughter. Hair swept into a bun, apron tied tight around her waist, eyes duller than I remembered. Behind her I could hear laughter, faint, distant, like it was coming from another house entirely. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't even step aside. "Dad, what are you doing here?" It was a whisper, almost drowned out by the wind, but it knocked the air right out of me. I blinked. "It's Thanksgiving." Her jaw tensed. "I didn't invite you." Silence. Not the kind that lingers gently, the kind that stings. The kind that tells you you've overstayed your welcome before you've even crossed the threshold. And then she added the words that would echo through my chest for days. "Leave." I stood there, 67 years old, pie in hand, suit pressed, shoes polished, staring at the daughter I had raised alone for 17 years. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my throat burned like I had swallowed gravel. She started to close the door, and I swear to God, the pie almost dropped from my hand. "You want to know how we got here? You want to know why a father who taught his daughter how to ride a bike, who sat through every school play and every heartbreak, why he ended up frozen out like a stranger? It didn't start here. It started 4 years ago. When my wife passed, I stopped being dad. I became a burden. Her name was Clarissa, my high school sweetheart. 39 years of marriage. Cancer took her quick, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. And after she was gone, the world didn't just get quieter. It got meaner. Autumn changed. At first, I told myself it was grief. We all handle it differently. She had always been the strong one, always pulled her own weight. Got straight A's, got a scholarship. Got a corporate job in a tall building where they wore those laminated badges and said words like synergy. But after the funeral, she stopped calling. Not right away. First, it was just longer gaps between check-ins. Then it was canceled plans, missed birthdays. And then, "Dad, I'm just really busy, okay?" She said it like I was a telemarketer. Like love was a time slot she couldn't fit in. Still, I showed up. Brought soup when she was sick. Took her car to the mechanic. Helped pay her down payment when the bank said she wasn't creditworthy enough. I told myself, she's grieving. She'll come around. But something else was shifting. She stopped looking me in the eye. Started keeping secrets. And then came Caleb, the boyfriend. The one with perfect teeth and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. From the start I knew. He talked to me like I was competition. Called me sir, with that smirk, like he was waiting for me to keel over and get out of the way. But Autumn, she lit up around him. At least, at first. So I kept my mouth shut, because when you're a widowed father trying not to lose the last thing you have left, silence feels safer than honesty. But silence didn't save me. 1 year ago, she stopped returning my calls altogether. 3 months later, she texted me from a new number, got a new phone. Busy work. Hope you're well. I stared at that message until the screen dimmed. There wasn't a single love you, not even a dad, just cold pixels. Like I was an obligation she didn't want to deal with anymore. So I backed off. I didn't show up. I didn't call. I waited. Birthdays came and went. So did Christmas. This year, I couldn't take it. I told myself, just show up. Remind her who you are. Show her what she's forgotten. So I did. 3 trains, 1 cab. A sweet potato pie. And the hope that maybe, just maybe, my daughter would smile again. But she didn't. And now I'm standing on her doorstep, staring at the slammed door like it's a gravestone. That's when something snapped in me. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Resolve. She didn't want to acknowledge the man who paid her bills? Fine. Then she didn't need my help keeping her roof. I stood there for a moment longer. The pie fell to the steps. The foil split open like a wound. And I turned, walked back down the driveway, pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Autumn's mortgage was due in 4 days. She was 2 months behind already, and with 1 tap, I froze the automatic payment. Not out of spite, but because sometimes love has to look like distance. Sometimes a father's lesson comes not through rescue, but through absence. I never wanted to hurt her. But that day, I realized I was the only one hurting, and maybe it was time she felt it too. But what I didn't know, as I stood at the curb watching my Uber pull up, was that this small act of defiance would set off a chain reaction I couldn't undo. The kind of reckoning that forces secrets into the light and brings a family to its knees. Before everything changed, before slammed doors and frozen payments, I had a routine. Nothing flashy, just a quiet, measured life. The kind you build after nearly 7 decades of surviving. My days started with a pot of coffee and a weathered copy of the Boston Globe. I liked the feel of paper in my hands, the way the ink smudged slightly on my thumbs. There's something about reading the news the old way. It keeps the world from moving too fast. I'd sit on the back porch with my coat on and sip slowly, watching the leaves gather in corners of the yard. The house was too big for one man, but it still smelled like Clarissa, her vanilla candles, her favorite jasmine tea. I couldn't bring myself to change a single thing. Evenings, I'd put on a record. Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, Billie Holiday when I was feeling tender. I'd pour a bit of bourbon into the glass she gave me for our 30th anniversary, the one etched with "Still Yours," and I'd close my eyes, listening to the crackle of vinyl and the quiet hum of memory. My daughter used to come by. Sundays were ours. Autumn would swing by in her work heels, always texting with one hand and holding a takeout bag in the other. "I don't cook, Dad, you know this," she'd joke, kissing me on the cheek. We'd eat on the couch, Thai food, mostly, and she'd fill the room with stories from her job. Some marketing firm I never fully understood, but she made it sound important. She had the spark, fast-talking, sharp-dressed, never second-guessing herself. She reminded me of Clarissa when she was younger, before the illness. There were moments I'd just watch Autumn talk, hands flying, eyes lit up, and I'd think, we made it. After everything, after the miscarriages, after the chemo, after I nearly lost the house once, just to keep Clarissa on the treatment that gave us one more Christmas together. Autumn had made it. And I thought maybe that meant I had too, but I didn't notice the shift when it first started. The first time she canceled a Sunday visit, she had a reason. "Work deadline, Dad. I'll make it up to you next week." The next time it was a weekend trip. Then she stopped calling back. Started texting instead. Shorter, colder. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I was too much. Too quiet. Too old. But then came Caleb. The first time I met him, I was painting the guest bedroom Autumn had asked me to help with. She said she wanted to turn it into a home office. I brought my ladder, my brushes, and an old tarp that still smelled like basement dust and turpentine. He walked in without knocking. Tall, polished, cologne so strong it stung my eyes. Designer jeans, suede shoes, and a voice that belonged on television. "Whoa, didn't realize we had a handyman in the house," he joked, grinning. I turned around, roller still dripping paint, and extended a hand. "Washington Roberts. Autumn's father." He shook it loosely. "Caleb, her partner." Partner, not boyfriend, not fiancé, just partner. He looked around the room, hands in his pockets. "You, always do the painting yourself?" I nodded. "Been doing it since Autumn was 5. She used to help me. She picked the colors." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She's lucky. Most dads wouldn't show up with a ladder and a paint tray." It sounded like a compliment, but something in his tone made my stomach twist. Over the next few months, I saw him more often. Not because he came around, but because I was always the one showing up. I'd stop by to drop off groceries, or fix the broken porch light, or bring her soup when she got the flu. Caleb was always there, shirtless, lounging on the couch, remote in hand. He'd nod at me like I was the building super. Not once did he offer to help. Not once did he say thank you. And Autumn, she stopped noticing. She started taking my presence for granted. A quick, "Thanks, Dad," over her shoulder, a distracted hug. A closed bedroom door. And when I mentioned concerns, gently, cautiously, her response was always the same. "Dad, you're reading too much into it. Caleb's just Caleb." But I saw the way he looked at her, possessive, calculated, like she was something to be managed, not loved. He'd talk for her, answer questions I asked her directly, control the thermostat, the music, the guest list. One time I watched him swipe her phone out of her hand mid-text. She laughed. I didn't. And once, just once, I saw her flinch. Only for a second, but it haunted me. Still, I convinced myself she was happy. She was an adult, a grown woman. She didn't need my permission. And maybe I was just a lonely old man seeing ghosts where there were none. So I stayed quiet, kept showing up, kept paying the mortgage every month, even after she said she was between jobs for a bit. I didn't mind. I had enough. And I thought, this is what fathers do. But here's the thing about always being there. People start thinking you'll never leave, that your love has no limit, that no matter how cold they get, you'll keep showing up with a pie in hand and your heart in your throat. I remember the last birthday dinner we had before it all fell apart. She booked a reservation at some rooftop place. I wore my best coat, shined my shoes. When I arrived, they were already 2 glasses in. Autumn was laughing at something Caleb had just said. But when I pulled out the small box I'd wrapped myself, a pendant that had belonged to her mother, her face changed. Like I had embarrassed her. She tucked it away quickly. Didn't even open it at the table. Caleb leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She giggled. And I sat there, chewing dry steak, listening to them talk like I wasn't even there. Later that night, when I hugged her goodbye, I said, "Call me soon, all right?" She smiled. "Of course, Dad." But she didn't. I kept that pendant in the same coat pocket for months. She never wore it. I never asked. Because some silences are too heavy to touch. Looking back, I held on to one assumption, that blood was thicker than bitterness. That a daughter, no matter how distant, would always find her way back to her father. But the truth? Family can forget you. Love can rot quietly under the surface of routine. And sometimes the people you've sacrificed everything for are the ones holding the knife. I didn't know it then, but that Thanksgiving wasn't just the breaking point, it was the unveiling. The moment everything I had ignored, excused, and forgiven came back to collect, because what I thought was a misunderstanding was a plan. And I was about to see just how deep the betrayal ran. It didn't happen all at once. The betrayal unraveled like a slow leak in a boat, quiet, steady, and dangerous. And by the time I realized I was sinking, the water was already at my neck. I froze the mortgage payment the day Autumn turned me away at her doorstep. I told myself it was temporary, a wake-up call, not revenge, just a reset. But then something strange happened. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask why her payment didn't go through. For 2 weeks, nothing. And that silence, it gnawed at me. Until finally, I broke. I called the bank. Asked to confirm the freeze. The woman on the line hesitated. "Actually, Mr. Roberts, the mortgage was transferred out of your name last month." My breath caught. "What do you mean, transferred?" She clicked around for a few seconds too long. "It looks like your daughter and her partner initiated a refinancing. Your name was removed from the account." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the mug of cold coffee I hadn't touched since that morning, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear her voice. I didn't authorize that." "I'm sorry, sir. We have signed documentation on file." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat there in silence for over an hour. The walls felt smaller. The light through the window harsher. I pulled out my filing cabinet, the drawer where I kept every receipt, every payment stub, every letter of approval with my name stamped at the top. That house was in both our names. I co-signed. I funded the down payment. I paid half the renovation costs. I even wired her $10,000 when Caleb couldn't find work during the layoffs. I wasn't just helping her. I was building something for us. A home. A future. Security. And now I was gone from the papers like I never existed. It took me another week to find out how they did it. A former neighbor of Autumn's, Mrs. Brennan, an older woman I'd once helped change a tire in the rain, called me one morning. "I thought you should know, Mr. Roberts," she said softly. Autumn and Caleb were showing the house to a realtor. Said they're moving to the West Coast. I just figured you'd want to know. My mouth went dry. West Coast? They were selling the house? I drove straight to her place. I didn't care if I was uninvited. I needed answers. The house was empty. A for sale sign staked into the lawn. Curtains gone. Porch swing removed. No goodbye. No explanation. Not even a forwarded address. Just gone. When I got back home, I opened the last email she had ever sent me. Subject line, important, sign ASAP. It was 3 months old. I hadn't even opened it. Inside it read, "Hey Dad, I need you to e-sign this form for a loan adjustment. Just routine paperwork. Caleb said you'd understand. Deadline is tomorrow. Love you." There was a DocuSign link. I never clicked it. I don't know why. Maybe something in me knew better. But she had sent it, lied in the message, framed it as something harmless. I didn't sign it, so how did they get it done? That question clawed at me. I called the bank again. This time I pushed. The representative, cornered by my insistence, admitted what I feared. The form we received was signed digitally by someone using your email address, with matching identification scanned and submitted. A scan. I hadn't scanned my ID in years, but there was one place it lived on my old desktop. The one I let Caleb fix after it froze up last summer. He took it home overnight. "I cleaned up the malware," he said the next day with a grin. "Runs like new." He ran more than that. He ran my identity through a printer and used my daughter's trust to gut me out of the biggest asset I'd ever touched. I spent the next few days in a kind of daze, not angry, not even hurt, just hollow. I didn't eat, didn't shave, didn't open the curtains. I walked past the same photographs every day. Autumn's high school graduation, our trip to Cape Cod, Clarissa holding Autumn's baby blanket up like a victory flag. I whispered to myself, she wouldn't do this. Not my daughter. But the truth echoed louder than my denial. She did. And yet, I still loved her. That was the worst part. Some nights I caught myself dialing her number, just to hear her voicemail. Some nights I dreamed of her as a little girl, standing at the top of the stairs, calling out, "Daddy, can you carry me to bed?" I used to say yes even when my back ached and my knees throbbed, because love didn't count costs. Not back then. But now, all I had left was a silence that stretched too wide to cross. The spiral came quietly, not rage, not screaming, just forgetting. Forgetting to turn off the stove, forgetting to pay the electric bill, forgetting to answer texts from the few friends who still checked in. I sat for hours in the dark, bourbon untouched, music off. One night I caught my reflection in the window, eyes sunken, shirt stained, collar askew. I looked like a man who'd lost his daughter. But what broke me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the clarity, the knowing. Knowing that I was used, that I was seen not as a father, but as a wallet, a resource, a stepping stone. Knowing that the years I spent preserving my wife's memory, protecting my daughter's dreams, they ended in deletion, in a fake signature and a closed door. And yet, I couldn't fully hate her. That's what grief does. It tangles up your rage with memory. It lets you feel fury one minute, then guilt the next. I'd whisper, "She's still my daughter," as if that was a spell strong enough to undo what she'd done. But it wasn't. Some damage goes too deep for names to fix. Then came the final twist. A letter in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a wedding invitation. Autumn and Caleb Maui, Hawaii, March 17th, reception to follow. Tucked into the envelope was a handwritten note. "Dad, I hope we can move past everything. I really want you there. If you come, maybe we can finally talk." Talk, after all this? The audacity, the cruelty. It wasn't an olive branch, it was bait. And for the first time, I felt something shift. I wasn't just broken. I was waking up. Because beneath the grief and the guilt, something new was forming. A fire. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted truth. And I was ready to bring everything they buried back into the light. I stopped answering the phone, stopped shaving, stopped pretending I was fine. Some mornings, I'd wake up in the chair I fell asleep in, still in the same clothes, throat dry, hands stiff. The fridge had nothing but mustard and takeout containers I didn't remember ordering. The house creaked louder at night, as if it too was morning. Clarissa's robe still hung behind the door, untouched. Her slippers lined up perfectly beneath the bed. I used to imagine her ghost walking in, brushing my shoulder, whispering, "Get up, Wash. You're better than this." But I wasn't. Not anymore. I made bad choices, quiet ones. I started gambling online, not recklessly, not at first. Just little games. Solitaire with a money twist. Poker with strangers and screen names. It wasn't about the winnings. It was about feeling something. A small hit of control, risk, distraction. I lost $3,200 in a week. Didn't tell a soul. I signed up for a dating app too. Thought maybe a voice, any voice, could pull me back into the world. The matches were either spam bots or women my age looking for someone to travel with. I hadn't been on a plane in 6 years. I matched with a woman named Diane. She liked poetry and red wine. We messaged for 2 days. On the third, she stopped responding. I never even got to tell her about Autumn. Maybe that's why she disappeared. Maybe she could smell the grief in my words. I tried therapy. My neighbor, Tony, saw me sitting on my porch one morning with my head in my hands. He's a Vietnam vet. Tough, quiet, doesn't talk unless he means it. He said, "You ever talk to someone about all that?" He didn't say your daughter, didn't say the betrayal. Just all that. I nodded like I knew what he meant. 2 days later, he slipped a card into my mailbox. Dr. Lena Helberg, licensed psychologist, grief. Family estrangement. Identity recovery. I stared at the card for a week. Finally called. Dr. Helberg had kind eyes. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and sat like she'd been listening her entire life. I told her everything. Slowly, through clenched teeth, through long silences, through tears I didn't expect. She didn't flinch when I said I hated my daughter. Didn't judge when I said I still loved her too. She asked, what hurts more? What she did to you? Or what it made you feel about yourself? I said, I feel like I failed. She said, who told you that failure looks like heartbreak? Her questions were like mirrors, uncomfortable, sharp, honest. Still, I kept showing up. Every Thursday at 3 p.m., same chair, same peppermint tea. I wish I could say I got better quickly. But grief isn't linear. Sometimes you feel like you're healing, then a memory sideswipes you and you're back on your knees. One day, I drove by a school field where I used to watch Autumn's soccer games. I parked, sat in silence, watched strangers play a game I no longer had a reason to care about. I whispered, "I miss you," like it might reach her. It didn't. Then came the email. 2 months before their wedding. Subject line, "Let's talk." It was from Autumn. "Dad, I know things got bad between us, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I don't want us to carry this forever. Caleb says maybe you could come for coffee, just the two of us, no pressure. I'm free this weekend if you are." It was the first message I'd gotten from her in nearly a year that didn't ask for money or a favor. My hands shook as I read it. This was it, I thought, the turning point. I trimmed my beard, bought a new sweater, practiced what I might say in the mirror, rehearsed every version of an apology I didn't owe. I was nervous like a teenage boy on a first date, hoping she might look at me with warmth again. We met at a small coffee shop near the harbor. She looked older, tired. Her hair was shorter. She wore dark glasses, even inside. But when she saw me, she smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. I thought, maybe this is the moment everything begins to heal. She hugged me, held it for a second too long, and I nearly cried. We sat, talked. She asked about Mom, about the old house, about my record collection. Then came the twist. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, voice careful. I nodded. Of course. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder. "I'm applying for a small business grant. They need proof of a co-signed financial history. That house mortgage, even though you're technically off the paperwork, would really help me qualify." My stomach dropped. "You're asking me to lie?" Her smile faltered. "Just sign a statement. Nothing crazy. It's not even legal stuff. Just support." The air turned cold. I stared at her, this woman who had once drawn me crayon cards that said, "Best daddy ever," and I saw the manipulation beneath her kindness. I realized I wasn't there to heal. I was there because she needed me. Again, like always, my voice cracked. "Is that all this was?" She looked away. "I thought you'd be happy to help." I stood up without finishing my coffee. She didn't follow me out. That night I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for hours. That was the moment I hit bottom. Not the day she removed me from the mortgage. Not the day she kicked me off her porch. It was the day she used hope as bait. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper, because it dresses itself up as redemption. It pretends to be forgiveness when it's just another transaction. And that's when I knew I had to stop pretending she would come back as the girl I once knew. That version of her was gone. In therapy the next week, Dr. Halberg said something that changed everything. "Washington, sometimes love isn't the bond you fight to preserve. Sometimes it's the boundary you learn to protect." I didn't respond right away, but I felt something shift. The next morning, I cleared out the spare room, the one where I kept Autumn's old prom dress, her childhood books, a stack of drawings from kindergarten. I boxed them, labeled them, drove them to the local shelter. When I returned home, the house felt quieter. But not in a haunting way, in a peaceful one. That was the sacrifice. Not the physical objects, but the hope. The fantasy that she'd come home, arms wide, tears falling, saying, "I'm sorry, Dad." I let it go. And in that emptiness, I felt something like peace begin to stir. That's when I met Marlene. She worked at the record store downtown. Late 50s, sharp tongue, eyes that saw through everything. She handed me a Billie Holiday reissue I'd been searching for and said, "Only a man with heartbreak listens to this at your age." I laughed. "Then give me two." We talked, slowly, then regularly. No expectations, no performances, just music and truth. And two people sitting in the wreckage of old lives, trying to build something new. I didn't call it healing, but it felt like breathing again. I didn't wake up one day and feel whole again. That's not how it works. Healing isn't a thunderclap. It's a slow rising sun, barely noticeable until the light touches everything. The first change was small. I started cooking again. Clarissa used to say the kitchen was my true church. Back in the day, I'd wake up early just to prep Sunday dinners: roast beef, garlic mash, cornbread so soft it fell apart in your hands. I hadn't cooked a real meal since she passed. But one morning, I found myself standing in the kitchen, apron on, hands deep in dough. Flour on the counter, Otis Redding on the radio, and tears I didn't expect running down my face. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years, I was feeding myself with love. Then came the second change. Marlene and I started meeting more regularly. Not just at the record shop. She invited me to a spoken word night at the local library, something about memory, legacy, and healing through storytelling. I didn't plan to participate. I was just there to listen. But she nudged me with her elbow and whispered, "You've got stories in you. Use them." That night, I stood behind a dusty mic and told a room full of strangers about my late wife's laugh, about my daughter's soccer games, about the silence of an empty porch. People cried. People clapped. Afterward, a young man, early 20s maybe, shook my hand and said, "You sound like my dad. I needed to hear that." I walked home lighter. I started volunteering. Once a week at a community kitchen. Twice a month at the library's youth mentorship program. They called me Mr. Wash, asked me about jazz, about how to fix a leaky faucet. One kid brought me a broken toaster, and we fixed it together in the back room. No one asked me about my daughter. No one knew about the betrayal. They just saw a man willing to show up. And showing up, not for Autumn, not for ghosts, but for myself and others. That's what saved me. Dr. Helberg called it identity reconstruction. "You were a father for so long, Washington. You forgot how to just be a man," she said. "Let yourself live outside the role." I didn't know who I was without someone to protect. But now I was discovering it. I wasn't just a father. I was a man who could still matter, still move forward, still be wanted. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Marlene invited me to her place. A modest apartment over a bookstore. Plants in the windows. Books stacked like furniture. She poured wine. Played Coltrane. We talked for hours. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "I know what you've lost. But I see what you've kept too, and that part of you? That's what I like." I didn't answer right away. Just took her hand and squeezed it. It wasn't about romance, not fully. It was about presence, connection, a soft yes in a life full of hard no's. I left that night with something in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the kind that expects someone to return, but the kind that lets you return to yourself. My house changed, too. I painted the living room, donated the old recliner, replaced the porch swing Autumn used to sit on with a bench made from reclaimed oak. I filled it with light again. Started hosting dinners for a few friends from the volunteer group. Made slow-cooked ribs and cornbread from scratch. Told stories. Laughed until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't loud like the holidays used to be, but it was real. And real was enough. And yet, as the weeks passed, I could feel a quiet drumbeat in the background. A faint, steady rhythm beneath all the peace. Caleb and Autumn's wedding was approaching. I hadn't RSVP'd. Hadn't spoken to her since that coffee shop meeting. The one where she dangled reconciliation like bait and asked for a favor instead. But I knew what was coming. Weddings don't just unite people, they expose them. They bring together past and present, lies and truth, masks and mirrors. And something in my bones told me, this wasn't going to be just a ceremony. This was going to be a reckoning. I didn't plan anything, didn't fantasize about revenge. But I couldn't ignore the itch. That feeling in the air like a storm on the horizon, silent, electric, inevitable. I started keeping a journal. Not for her, for me. I wrote down everything, what she said, what she did, what I allowed, what I forgave. The day she forged my signature, the text she never answered, the little ways she turned my love into something she could spend and discard. And slowly, I began to see something clearly. I wasn't just hurt, I was erased. And the man I had become, the one who fed himself, who mentored boys at the library, who made women laugh at spoken-word nights, he deserved to be seen. He deserved to tell the truth, even if it burned bridges, even if it meant standing alone. A week before the wedding, I received another email. Subject line, "Hope you'll still come." It was from Autumn. The message read, "Hey Dad, I know things are still tense, but I want you there, I miss you. And I think you'll like what we've planned. No apology, no explanation. Just an open door. And you know what? I walked right through it. Not because I trusted her, not because I needed her, but because I was no longer afraid of what would happen if I stood in that room, looked her in the eye, and said nothing but the truth. The suit I wore to Clarissa's funeral still fit. I pressed it myself, polished my shoes until they shined like glass. And as I packed my overnight bag, I tucked one thing in last, a copy of the notarized statement from the bank, the one confirming the unauthorized refinance. Not as a weapon, not as leverage, but as proof to myself that I hadn't imagined any of it, that my pain was real, that my love, even when misused, had never been weak, and that maybe, just maybe, it was time for the masks to fall. The Hawaiian air was thick with gardenia and salt. Waves curled lazily behind the ceremony arch. White chairs lined up in perfect symmetry, too pristine to feel real. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. Pale roses, silk ribbons, delicate champagne flutes set for 200 guests. I stood at the edge of it all, watching them. Autumn and Caleb, glowing for the cameras. She wore a satin dress that shimmered in the sun. He wore entitlement like a tuxedo. Their guests laughed easily, sipping wine and snapping selfies. But I stayed still, just one shadow in the light. I hadn't told her I was coming, hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't asked for permission. I just walked in and stood where she couldn't ignore me. It took 15 minutes before she saw me. I felt the moment her eyes caught mine across the lawn, a flicker of disbelief, then panic barely masked with a smile. She whispered something to Caleb. He turned, froze, then that smirk, the same one he wore the day I met him. The one that said, "You're too late, old man." He reached for her arm like he always did when he wanted control, but she pulled away and walked toward me. "Dad," her voice was low, cautious. "I didn't know you were coming." I looked at her, calm, steady. "I figured you didn't," I said. We stood there for a moment, father and daughter, surrounded by flowers and strangers and the weight of everything we'd lost. "I meant what I said in my message," she added. "I really do want peace between us." I nodded slowly, then pulled the envelope from my coat, quietly handed it to her. She didn't open it right away. She just looked down at it like it was burning her hand. "What is this?" "The bank statement," I said. "Proof of the refinance, the signature you used." Her eyes darted away. Her chest rose, then fell. "I didn't know he." "Caleb handled all that," she said. "He told me it was just paperwork." "You believe that?" I asked. "Or did you just not want to know the truth?" She didn't answer. Silence filled the space between us like smoke. For a moment, I saw it, the little girl who used to grip my hand in busy parking lots, who once cried when I missed a school recital, who called me Daddy in the voice of someone who believed I could fix anything. She was still there, buried, but watching. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, eyes wet. I nodded, "And yet you did." Caleb watched us from across the lawn, tense, calculating. I turned my gaze to him, not with anger, but clarity. And then I said the one line I'd waited a year to say. You didn't just lose my help, Autumn. You lost the version of me who would have protected you from the man standing next to you. Her face collapsed inward. Not tears, not rage, just a quiet, devastated knowing. Like something inside her shattered, not from the truth, but from finally facing it. She turned to look at him. Really look. And for the first time, I saw her eyes widen with recognition. Not of me, of herself. Of what she had become standing next to him. I didn't say another word, didn't need to. I turned, walked away. Past the guests, past the flowers, past the altar. I didn't look back. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with someone choosing themselves for the first time in a long time. I didn't stay for the reception. Didn't toast, didn't dance. Didn't watch them cut the cake. I walked back to the hotel alone, the breeze brushing through the palm trees like a gentle reminder, you survived. That night I sat on the balcony, listening to the waves. The moon hung low over the ocean, and for the first time in what felt like years, my chest felt quiet. Not empty, just quiet. When I got home, Boston was still cold. The porch light flickered like it missed me. I unpacked slowly, took my time, hung my coat, unzipped my bag, folded the suit, the envelope I had handed Autumn at the wedding. She never gave it back. I didn't need it anymore. I opened my journal, the one I started during the worst of it. There were letters in there I never sent. Pages filled with all the things I wanted to say but knew she wasn't ready to hear. One in particular stood out. Autumn, I used to believe love meant always showing up, no matter how I was treated. But now I understand. Love doesn't mean abandoning yourself in the process. I tore it out gently, folded it once, and burned it in the fireplace. Some things are meant to be said only to yourself. Spring came slowly that year. The kind of slow where every bloom feels earned. I planted new flowers in the front yard. Tulips, lavender, a few rows of rosemary. Kids from the neighborhood would pass by and wave. One even stopped to ask if I needed help digging. Got it, I told him, patting the soil. I've been digging my way back to peace for a while now. He didn't get the joke, but I smiled anyway. Marlene came over more often. We started hosting jazz nights. A handful of old friends, 2 guitars, a record spinning between sets. Laughter in the living room again. Dishes in the sink for good reasons. Life blooming in the quiet places. One Sunday afternoon, she brought a box of books and left them on my coffee table without asking. Make space, she said with a grin. I already did, I replied, pointing to the shelf I'd cleared last week. I saw Autumn once more. Late summer, grocery store. Just before closing, she was alone, wearing sandals and a loose cardigan. Her eyes found mine at the end of the produce aisle. She didn't look away. I nodded. She nodded back. No words, no tears. But that nod, it held more than apologies. It held recognition. Of loss, of love, of choices made in roads we both had to walk without each other. And that was enough. I never asked what happened after the wedding. Whether Caleb stayed, whether she sold the house, whether she ever thought of calling. I let it all go. Because closure, I've learned, isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just planting lavender, sitting in the sun, listening to your own breath and realizing you're still here. On my 68th birthday, I stood in my kitchen, icing a carrot cake I baked from scratch. Clarissa used to do it with a spoon. I did it with a butter knife. It looked a little crooked. But it was mine. Marlene sang off-key while lighting candles. We laughed until we cried. Someone asked if you could go back and change it all, would you? I paused, thought about it. No, I said. Because the man I became, I only met him on the other side of loss. And that man, he was worth meeting. If you liked this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your impressions in the comments below. We would love to read it. Thank you for watching.